You've endured a lot. Time for a reward. The little one's asleep, so let me show you some real magic.
A witchman, mumbled the woman. Called by some, a witcher. To summon him is most dangerous, albeit one must. For when against the monster and the vermin there be no aid, the witchman can contrive. But careful one must be to touch not the witchman, for thus the mange can one acquire. And lasses do from him hide away, for lustful the witchman is above all measure. Indeed, a witchman is lustful above all measure, as proven by the large collection of cards we could collect in the first Witcher game. And although the casual way in which Geralt treated corporal pleasures was not exactly at odds with his life in his before Yennefer era, The Witcher 2 has provided a more mature relationship where the key role, the same as in 2007 production, was played by Triss. But let's not forget that it was only in Wild Hunt when the devs had to face the crucial task of establishing Yennefer of Vengerberg, Geralt's iconic lover in the book saga, as a video game character. We looked back at The Witcher 3 and asked the players about the love choices they made in the game. Let's find out whether those players are Team Triss or Team Yennefer, and why the introduction of the raven-haired sorceress was such a challenge for the video game's world. This video will be a brief overview of our little research. If you want to find out more, make sure to click the link in the description below to read the whole article. What needs to be highlighted is that more than 7,000 readers took part in our survey, which makes for a pretty decent sample. Let us now examine the specific numbers and see what we can find. Our survey asked, who did you choose in The Witcher 3? And you could provide the following responses. I read the books first and chose Yennefer. I read the books first and chose Triss. I played the games first and chose Yennefer. I played the game first and chose Triss. I haven't read the books and chose Yennefer. I haven't read the books and chose Triss. And, of course, there was also I chose both sorceresses.
Yen, I adore you.
No points for creativity.
So what were the results? Well, if you read the books first, you probably chose Yennefer. Of the 3,122 people voting in this group, 72.6% opted for the woman destined to be with Geralt since The Last Wish. There is no doubt that the relationship of the two is so deeply embedded in the heads of the fans of Sapkowski's prose that it seemed like the only viable choice to confess your love to the witch from Vengerberg, as Geralt himself would have probably done. If you played the games first, you probably had a tough nut to crack. 1,137 people voted in this group, among which 52.9% chose Yennefer and 47.1% opted for Triss. It seemed obvious that the emergence of a new love interest may encourage a change in preferences. Keep in mind, however, that the players who have spent some time with the series version of Marigold already knew what kind of relationship formed between her and the Witcher in the meantime. If you haven't read the books at all, the choice wasn't even a bit easier. You're one of the 2,040 people who haven't ventured outside of The Witcher's game world and chose either Yennefer, 56.8%, or Triss, 43.2%. The emergence of a new, intriguing female character could be counteracted by the fact that, after all, Triss was the first sorceress we got to know in the game. Most of you, however, had enough patience to wait even through the Skellige arc and chose what was in Geralt's heart. If you've chosen both sorceresses, you either couldn't decide which one you prefer, or simply hoped for a 1+2 relationship and got burned. There is also a third possibility. You had no idea how important the love declaration is because other RPG have accustomed you to having situations like, you're about to enter a permanent relationship, and now congratulations, go watch a sex scene. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
I settle for nothing but the best.
So the first thing that immediately catches the eye are the results in the group of people who have read the books before starting the virtual adventure. This group of voters accounts to more than 40% of all the votes cast, allowing us to say that the knowledge of the book saga is quite strong among the fans of The Witcher 3. Thus, the fact that most of you chose Yennefer is hardly surprising. She ended up with your Geralt in almost 3/4 of cases. What was surprising though was the advantage the sorceress from Vengerberg had in other groups, although the difference in votes was not so great. People who have read the books only after playing The Wild Hunt contributed 15.8 of all votes, and 28.3 of you weren't convinced to have a taste of Sapkowski's original, despite having spent many hours with the third Witcher. Those undecided and trigonometry fans represent 12.5% of all voters. So the question is, why did most of us choose Yennefer? The reasons for this development may be several. We have tried to analyze them and reach to the source. We've sent our questions directly to CD Projekt Red and received comprehensive responses from Karolina Stachyra, senior writer of The Wild Hunt. We had some theories beforehand which are not necessarily consistent with what the creators had in mind, but we wanted to introduce you to the different points of view on this issue. We have to begin from the fact that Yennefer existed in the minds of the players for a long time. For those who have read the books, choosing the raven-haired sorceress was something natural because it was she and Ciri who gave the Witcher something he could call home, with Triss treating Ciri as her younger sister. Things get a little more complicated if the player wasn't introduced to the story through the books, but there's an explanation for that as well. A great deal of things was said about Yennefer in The Witcher 2, and although she didn't appear personally, except for the flashbacks, we were aware of how important she was to Geralt. So when we finally get the opportunity to meet the woman we have spent so much time looking for, the affair with Triss does not seem so important anymore. We've approached the matter very methodically. First, we had a brainstorm on the essential features of Yennefer that made her so special. We knew that for her character to be believable, she must have a personal purpose for the sake of which she would be ready to move mountains. That was the critical moment for us, because for a while we feared that if her motivation was too similar to Geralt's, Yennefer would lose her individualism. It quickly dawned on us, however, that the only thing in the world for which the sorceress would be willing to bear any sacrifice would be to rescue Ciri, and looking for an alternative motivation for her seemed forced and doomed from the start. It was then when we came to the conclusion that Yennefer resorts to vastly different methods than Geralt, so we were confident that both characters will be distinct and consistent. On the other hand, maybe it's not Yen's doing, maybe it's the change that has taken place in the beautiful Marigold that wasn't to our liking. Note that in the first and the second Witcher, Triss is a confident, rather bossy woman, acquiring some of the qualities we associated mostly with Yennefer, though she's not so arrogant and haughty. The events that took place in the finale of Assassins of Kings and their aftermath deprived the sorceress of all the privileges she enjoyed so far, and her only remaining choice is to fight for her colleagues, some of whom had crossed her on a few occasions. Little Marigold has grown up and her priorities have changed. Maybe it's her maturity and newfound idealism that lies behind the fact that we've decided on a different romance. In the previous games, Triss enjoyed a completely different social status. She was a valued advisor to one of the most powerful rulers of the North, a respected and wealthy person. The political events taking place during the Wild Hunt and prior to the beginning of the game made her lose almost everything: power, position, money, and influence. Her personality was the only thing she had left. I think that, paradoxically, this is what revealed the strength of her character. She finally gained something that was worth fighting for, a goal that, if achieved, would benefit not only her but also the entire community, and I feel that it suits her character better than working for personal gains. We also never treated Triss as Yennefer's rival. Let's not forget that they were good friends in the saga. Yes, they had some clashes, mainly when it came to Geralt, but when the situation called for them to work together, they never let their personal animosities get in the way and were able to fight for a common cause shoulder to shoulder. We wanted to underline this particular relation in the game, which is why we've put a number of scenes in The Wild Hunt that emphasize the strength of their friendship. But that's not the end of our speculations. Knowing we spent so much time with Triss during the first two installments of the series, perhaps eventually the players wanted to try something new, something a bit more exotic. In addition, it should be noted that the presence of Yennefer left a deeper impression in our memory than the story of her friend, or at least that's how I see it. It is true that the wizard-focused Novigrad arc as well as the Skellige arc both offer roughly comparable amounts of time with both women, but it is Yen who is always working in the background of events, and she's the driving force behind the extensive search for her adopted daughter. You could therefore dare to take the risk of identifying the reasons for our decision solely as character exposure time in The Wild Hunt. We were facing the challenge of presenting two very strong female characters, vastly different, both extremely important to Geralt. Of course, in the saga, Geralt eventually chose Yennefer, who was his great love, but he always harbored strong feelings for Triss, and it was extremely important for us to present this situation and the difficulty of this choice in the game. To do this, we've tried, first of all, to show the complexity of character of the two sorceresses, their flaws, strengths, and what they're fighting for. We've put them in difficult situations and circumstances, had them experience extreme emotions, everything in order for the player, and Geralt, to have a tough nut to crack in the end. We took special care to provide both Triss and Yennefer with equal amounts of screen time, to give them their own side quests and a role to play in the main storyline, so that the player felt how very important they are for Geralt. Both of them. It's still possible, however, that most of us chose Yennefer because we expected that at any moment the game would clearly indicate that it's high time we decided which of the sorceresses we want Geralt to spend the rest of his life with. Such an explanation is not as impossible as you might think. A lot of games of the last decade accustomed us to the fact that the dialogue window leaves no doubt as to what we're doing, informing the player if what they're saying is considered flirting or will close up the possibility of romance with others. In the Wild Hunt, there's no such thing, so some players might not have been aware of the weight their words carried. As for indicating the choice between Triss and Yennefer, I feel that it worked out in a very organic way. None of us wanted to create a situation or write a dialogue line in the vein of, "And now, dear player, decide with whom Geralt will spend the rest of his life." It makes no sense, we don't work like that, and we don't want to write like that because it feels unnatural. In real life, no one asks such questions or presents us with a choice formulated like this. We gave the players an opportunity to get to know both sorceresses, see what kind of people they are, spend time with them, and learn their strengths, passions, and weaknesses. And then both of them demanded that we choose in a more or less explicit manner. I think that everyone, even an extremely casual player who clicks through most of the dialogue, understood that those were not mere words, and that this particular choice had very real consequences. Writing romance in video games is no easy task. On the one hand, it has to be mature enough not to be cheesy, and on the other, you can't take the seriousness too far so as not to risk being ridiculous. It's equally difficult to present two women, one we've known for many years in the virtual world, and the other, who for those familiar with the universe is an iconic and very specific character, and what's worse, had been chosen first by our protagonist. When trying to analyze why Yennefer is the top choice among the players, I would lean towards the explanation that even if the game didn't suggest to choose any of the characters, somewhere in the back of our minds there would lurk the idea that the raven-haired sorceress is the right choice from the point of view of the canon Geralt. Whether you consider it a weakness or not, it's up to you.